Welcome to IT Port. In this session, we are going to see about how to get locked objects details in SQL Server. In example, in this session, I am going to create a shared log on student table. This is a student table. It contains student ID and student name. In this table, I am going to create a shared log with the use of within a repeatable read isolation level. See, just fetch the student data with repeatable read isolation level. So now I use the begin transaction and I didn't give commit or rollback. So here the shared log will occur. See, we can get the locked object details or log details in two ways. Generally, we can get the logged details in two ways. One is sp_log. It's a system procedure. Retrieve the logged objects in database ID and in which session it was log occurred in which session and which database and which object and logged resource type and resource list in the logged mode. So we can get the logged details using sp_log. It's a session ID. This server process ID is optional. If you find that session with the session ID with @sp ID, so it result 51. So exclusive we can give 51 as a session ID parameter, and we can get the what are the logs are occurred in the session 51. So here the object ID contains row level log and page level logs. See, we can get the object name, pause this and get a table name. So this is the first way with sp_log. So execute with the session ID. A session ID is an optional parameter. So with the session ID we can get the object ID and database ID and the log type. So with the object name function, the use of object name function, we get the actual object name. So this is the first way, and the second way is dynamic management view. Using dynamic management view, just execute this. It contains a lot of data, the resource type and the resource database ID and the resource associated entity ID. This column contains a object ID, the table name, and these are the page ID and the log partition and request mode, the log mode and the request type, the request status and the request session ID. So these are the data fetched from the transaction logs dynamic management views. So we can make a joins from transaction logs with sessions, partitions and objects. See, so basically the object contains an integer value. It matched with the object name function, or we can get the relevant object name from sys.objects, but the page ID is a big integer value, so it won't match with the sys objects. So this is why we use the sys.partitions. See, this example sys.objects where object ID is equal to this. So it returns a values, but this value we cannot check with sys.objects, and here it's a big integer value, so it is a error. The object name only checked with the integer value, so we can fetch the data for this value joins with partitions and the partition ID. So it shows the partition ID for that object. It's a page ID and it allocates for this object. So joins with the sys objects, we can get the partition page allocated for what, for which object. So this is why we use the sys partitions. And again, sys that dynamic management view for execute sessions to retrieve the host name. So this use contains the session ID and host name, the program name details. So it is a lot of data based on the sessions. So using these sessions we can get the host name, and the sys.database is for database ID from transaction logs. So finally we can get the data like this format: host name and the resource type, and the resource type object's name. So this is for student page and student row ID, and the database name is IT port. These are the associated entity ID and the request mode, log type, status, request session ID. These are the rows affected with the table page ID or page or row ID. So it reflects the number of rows were logged. So using this query we can get the logged objects details, or what are the objects are logged in the SQL Server engine. So these queries are mentioned in the below video descriptions. You can refer. So this topic will be very useful to you to find what are the objects are logged in SQL Server. So if you like this session, please like and subscribe. Thank you, friends.